Welcome to part 2 in our DB-01 tutorial series, covering some of the more advanced topics, although we'll start simply. Let's do gate. Usually, or most obviously, the select gate knob does swing. That's just when the pattern's playing and you turn the knob. But if you hold a step, to adjust gate length. Let's get a bit of sound. So that's 100, that's 10. So you can play with these. It's pretty subtle, but in combination with a few of these other features can actually have a big effect. Let's look at another one, which is accent. So shift ACC, accent. The steps are slightly dimmed. Press the ones that you want accented. It's pretty obvious here. It gives a little boost to the VCA and the VCF. Let's go back to the gate here. Turn these gates up as well. Shift accent. Let's put a few more steps in. What were the gates? 10, 100. Let's take them all back to 10, just so it's a bit more obvious what the accents are doing. Now shift accent. They're dimmed. Let's add a few accents. Okay, next one to look at is slide. Shift slide. SLD. Knobs don't do anything. A slide is much like the accents. These are dimmed. If you add a slide, it gets a bit brighter. Notice this one's pretty obvious, this one not so much. Often depends what notes are around the slide. Again, reasonably subtle, but it can work well in concert with other things. And before we look at modulation, let's have a look at the pitch envelope. Vaguely similar to slide in some ways, ENV for envelope. The knobs here do something. Left is the decay and right is the depth. So let's put some pitch envelope here. You see the default is 0, 0, so no decay, no depth, no effect. Short decay, maximum depth. Let's change this one so we have maximum decay and you see they interact in an interesting way with the slides. Let's change this around the other way so we have 9 decay, 1 depth. Now again, these can be affected by the gate. Okay, now let's have a look at the most dramatic one, which is filter modulation, shift mod, MOD. Again, the select and back knobs don't do anything. There's a couple of different ways to get filter modulation. If you really like the sound you're on, it's often useful to take note of where the filter is sitting before you start this modulation process, as you will see. Maybe the easiest but least accurate way to do it is to hold the record button -1. That is showing where the filter is at the moment. If you just keep holding the record button, that's going to record a level of -8 on the filter to every step, or you could record a level of 5 to every step, or you could record all sorts of levels to each step as they go along. Just let go of the record button and you get those values. Take the filter back down. Now maybe you'd like some finer control. Well, we're still in modulation mode. If you press and hold the step, you'll see what the value is of the modulation. Well, the filter's -18 there. It's +18 here, +14, +35, +44. Well, we've got a lot of positive values. Let's put in some negative values, and this is the other way to do it. Hold down the step. Now, of course, it seems as if the whole thing's changed, but that's only because in trying to apply a negative value, I've had to turn the main filter down. So, give the steps the value you want, and then put the filter back. Now you'll notice that the values are all relative when it's down here. You're only just hearing the steps which have a very high positive value, but when it's up here, you're not getting that much of an effect because the values are all relative. So mid position's not a bad place to be, depending on what your sound is. Now, if you want to clear the modulation, a couple of different ways to do it. You could go in, of course, and whoops, not adjust the note. You could go in and well, you got to be in modulation mode, don't you? You could go in and adjust. Oh, gee, I'll get it right eventually. Adjust the value manually here. Take that back. Adjust that, but that could be a bit tedious, especially if you've got 32 or 64 steps, something like that. So another thing to do, make sure your filter is on 0, then just hit the record button. That's going to record a value of 0 modulation on every step. So now we don't have any modulation. Okay, new pattern. Let's have a look at what I think is possibly the least useful function, which is transpose, TRA. See these steps slide up, press a step, I mean, this is supposed to be a keyboard of sorts. 1170 tones, yeah, well, you know. Not terribly useful, I think. Maybe great in a live situation, who knows. By pressing the select knob, you get the little dot there. In quite a few modes, a little dot means latched, so you can latch it to a value. Unfortunately, you can't record anything, so again, not particularly useful in that respect, but you may need it. Now, before we look at the arpeggiator, let's have a look at something which goes very nicely with the arpeggiator, and that's scale. So shift scale, SCL, chromatic, major, minor, major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, whole tone, major blues, minor blues, and a few user scales which you can program yourself. And of course off. Let's go for minor. Once you've selected the scale, you see the representation of the scale there. You can choose your key. Let's start up a pattern. The other interesting thing, of course, is when your pattern's going, when you choose a scale, and a root note, it'll change that pattern to conform to that. So let's have a look at the arpeggiator. Shift arpeg, arp. You get a representation here of what's meant to be keyboard. Suppose so. You can just press and hold it. You can also use the octave buttons, and you notice the intensity changes depending on where you are, which is a nice little feature. You can have it playing. Let's have a look at the parameters. Now, you get BPM, which you may think, oh, that's something to do with the arpeggiator, but it's not really. It is just another way to get to BPM while you're playing around with the arpeggiator. I mean, I suppose that's handy. Let's get a new sound while we're here. So we had BPM, DIR, which is direction. It's the usual sort of things. Up, down, and random. Nothing unexpected there. Octave. 1, 2, 3. Gate. Now, even though it goes 10 to 100, I think there's really only 3 settings here. There's short, which is 10. Let's just turn that off for a sec. There's 10. There's 90, which, let's see if we can make that a bit more obvious. So 10, which I think is short, 90, which you'd call long, and 100, which is really just tired, slurred. It certainly has quite a profound effect on the sound. Now let's say you want to record a portion of the arpeggiator into your sequence. Just press the record button. Now whatever you do on the arpeggiator is going to be recorded into that little sequence. So get out of record mode. Let's change. Let's go back into gate. go back into record mode. So you see we've got that sort of, oh, gee, that sounds bad, doesn't it? Yes, well there's another thing. I wish there was an undo button, but there's not. So you can get out of Arpeggiator mode, a little bit of editing too. But notice that the short gates that we recorded are still short, and the tied portion is still nicely tied together, which is a pretty good feature. Yes, that's very nice, but how can I change the speed at which the arpeggiated notes are being entered? Yes, good point. So, pattern, P-A-T, is the answer. There's 6 of them. If we just stop that for a moment, go back to, we're in arpeggiator mode, we're in pattern. From the 6 we're in number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 5. So you see from that, number 1 is just straight, 2 is straight but slower, 3 is straight but slower still, and then 4, 5 and 6 are slightly syncopated. So if we put it on 4, play the pattern again. So maybe if we, let's say we put a bit of swing in the pattern, get back into the arpeggiator. We're still on pattern number 4. Oh, that sounds terrible. But you get the idea. Let's get that swing off. So here's a new pattern. We'll have a look at the final feature of the arpeggiator. Shift arpeggiator. If we go down to the end, source, SRC, there's 2 choices here. There's step and PIA. PIA is your standard arpeggiator, what we have been playing with. I don't know what PIA stands for. I think it should be POA, plain old arpeggiator. But the other option is STP, step. Have a look at the change along here. When you're in arpeggiator mode, you've sort of got a keyboard of sorts. When you're in step mode, it shows the steps in your pattern. Now, although this is billed as a step roll function, you've got everything that the arpeggiator has except for octaves. And the main difference is, because you've got your steps here, it's the steps which will play. So, which I think is quite interesting. Now the other thing to notice is when you hold a step, have a look at the adjacent steps. They're slightly lit. So what happens if you hold down one of those slightly lit buttons as well? It's a rest. One of the consequences of this is that you can use blank steps as a pause. course it'd help if you had a drum machine going at the same time, because it'd be easier to time the pause, but you get the idea. Now you can have a lot of fun with this if, let's try a different, go back to bank 2, we'll have pattern 1, this old favourite. Now if we make this a little bit more extreme, you can see we can have quite a bit of fun here. Of course we'll have to go into step mode. Okay. You'd want to have other things going, of course. Anyway, you see what I mean? Lots of fun with that. Great for live improvisation, or just recording craziness on the fly, getting variations on patterns you might already have. Fantastic little feature. One big topic remains to cover in this tutorial, which is randomization. We'll go to an empty pattern first, bank 2, pattern, we'll find one that's dim, which means it's empty. Empty pattern. Now we'll go to shift random pattern. See all the lights along here represent, and they roughly equate with what's written underneath, but not exactly, different specific areas you can randomize, or if you hit pattern you can randomize the whole thing. Let's just randomize the whole thing. Press play. It's pretty terrible because everything is getting randomized. There's no parameters on any of it. You can just keep hitting it and see what you get, but it's sounding pretty terrible because, as I say, it's randomizing absolutely everything. So let's be a bit more selective, but we'll go through what they are. Accent, slide, modulation, they all equate to what's actually written underneath. Pitch envelope, yes. Last step is not last step. Last step is, because it's always over 16 steps, last step is just the gate on. So it's the distribution of notes. Play mode is the probability of a step playing. Transpose is the gate length. And scale is the notes that it will play. Now, if you just hit pattern, as I say, you just get a random salad of all these things. You might get lucky and find something wonderful. Chances are not. Let's get out of that. Go back to shift pattern. I think we were on that one, weren't we? Maybe not. Maybe this one. It'd be easy to find this horrible pattern, wouldn't you? Ah, now there's a lesson for everyone, including me. Why can't we find that horrible thing that we just did? Well, it's because we went out of the pattern we were in. We loaded another pattern, but we hadn't saved the pattern that we were in, so it's gone. There's a trap. I've fallen for it more than once. So you do remember though, oops, gets back into that again. Blank pattern, shift random pattern, randomize, play. Now you remember the shortcut to save a pattern, shift record, and you see SAB come up, shift record. Now it is possible that we can save this randomized gloomph from complete horribleness by customizing some of these. So 50% chance of an accent, 0 to 99, let's make it 0. 50% chance of a slide, 0. Modulation, here is where the select and the back notes do something. You can have modulation going from -50 to +50. Let's be a bit more subtle, -30 to +30. Pitch envelope, nothing. Last step, now you remember that is simply the distribution of gates, and what we've got here is a percentage. So if we go up to 99, we're going to have a gate on every step. If we go down to 0, it's not going to generate any gates. Let's say that's 50. Chance of a step playing, I'll keep that on 100. Transpose, which is gate length. Let's just keep it on that. And the note range. Low note, let's say 1E. High note, let's say 3A. So now when we go randomize pattern, it should turn into something a bit more sensible. Now something I've noticed about this mode which is interesting, although we may have a scale selected, so let's get out of that, go into scale, let's choose D major, go to that. Now that should be affecting. Okay, so the scale we've chosen is affecting the notes in this pattern. Let's go back into randomized pattern. So if we choose to randomize the pattern according to the parameters that we've set here, it won't conform to scale. But if we hit the scale button, it will. So no chance of any of them, no chance of that. Pitch envelope, no, don't want any of them. So the only ones we'll keep is modulation, the notes, and the gate distribution. Those three together, I find, is all you need to get the basis of something not too bad. Now a little trap here is if you think, oh, I'll just change the distribution of gates but leave the notes as they are, see what happens. You go, hang on, it's changing the notes. That's not right, it's just meant to be changing the gates. Well, what it's doing is, yes, it's just changing the gates, but when it adds new gates, it adds them at the root note. So it's going to replace some of the notes, and every time you do it, if it lands on something that's already got a note on it, it's going to replace the note value with the default note value. So then you've got to press the note randomizer again to get it back into the scale you want. Modulation can make a big difference. So it's not bad. Shift record. Let's see what different modulation does. Now if you compare what we're getting here to what we got initially, you can see what a huge difference it makes just by turning it off, or at least not using the full randomization functions, not getting random accents, slides, pitch envelopes, because it's too complex. Those things really want a human touch, but a little bit of random modulation, changing the gate and changing the notes when forced into a scale, can do very nice things. You could easily create multiple variations by just keeping the gates and the modulation, and then getting some new notes. The other nice thing about this is that your selections here are saved per bank. Now you remember the LFO setup is saved per bank as well. Well, your randomization selections are saved per bank. So what bank are we in? We're in bank 2. Go back to random pattern. Now if you want to save the randomization functions, press the record button, but you notice it doesn't seem to do anything, and if you power cycled now and came back, you'd find that your carefully selected randomization parameters have not in fact been saved, and you might find that frustrating. It's a very simple thing really. You've just got to hold the record button down for a bit longer. So now you see save come up, and now those randomization functions are saved. So have a look, that was bank 2. I'll switch it off, I'll switch it back on again. We'll go to shift bank 2, we'll go to shift pattern, we'll choose a blank pattern. There's a blank pattern. Now we go to shift random pattern, we'll go randomize the whole thing. Now we'll randomize the notes, because randomizing the whole thing, as you remember, doesn't pick up the scale. It sounds a bit different because we tend to be going a bit faster here, so we'll get out of that, go down to my usual little speed, go back into random pattern, randomize notes. So that's what we've got straight away on randomized pattern with our saved parameters. But if, for example, we go into bank 1, where I'm pretty sure I haven't saved any randomization functions, shift pattern, choose a blank pattern, There's a blank pattern. Now we go shift random pattern and do full randomize and then play. What an amazing difference there is between just a few saved parameters and fully randomized. So if you've tried random pattern and you're not impressed, just do some customizations and you'll find in fact it's very useful. So that's part 2. In the final part we'll look at the remaining advanced functions like MIDI control, user scales, CV in and out, things like that. Until then, see ya.